Our plenary speaker this evening describes himself as a botanist, but more of an ethnobotanist, an anthropologist who stands this field of anthropology on its head, and a much published author who speaks many languages. So you can begin to wonder what is he doing in a conservation science meeting. But I will leave that to him to relate, because he's going to talk about 3 decades of lived experience in the central Indian forests of Bastar, lived with the Durwa Adivasis, and he's going to be reflecting on what has been a very enriching, equally challenging experience, which is political and socially consciously reflected on his work, and he tells me that has enabled him to develop a strong and robust sense of the local ecology. When I first reached out to Madhu, probably maybe 6 months ago, to try and get him to come and talk to us, his first question was, why me? What do I know about conservation? What's my experience in conservation? Then in a series of phone calls and emails, we managed to convince him, and here he is. Madhu has also worked on wild foods. He's been very deeply involved with a non-timber forest produce exchange program, which is an Asia network with presence in Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, and India, which aims to empower people to manage their own natural resources while respecting the integrity of their cultural traditions. Madhu splits his time between the countries where the exchange works, the forests of Bastar, and his home in Kodaikanal. He's also worked on the ecology and environmental challenges that the Kodaikanal Lake has been and continues to face. While he deeply appreciates the challenges faced by both the state and government of India in central India, and has faced the problems caused by the government, he's still very willing to engage and work with the government. He's the author of the much acclaimed book, Wood, Smoke, and Leaf Cups, an autobiographical footnotes to the anthropology of the Durwa people. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to call on Madhu Ramnath to speak to us.
Everybody, I'm very thankful that you all have given me the time and opportunity to tell you my story. And it's going to be perhaps a story which is not with a PowerPoint. It's going to be a story. So, and sometimes without this or without the help, I have a notebook. I might get stuck, so just unstuck me in those moments, or give me some time. Before I tell you about the context, I'd like to start with a story. There were about 25 of us in Bastar, in a kind of rough gully on a summer afternoon, and we were all going to hunt boar, wild boar. And 25 people, there's a gully, and it's full of these chloroxylon kind of plants, chloroxylon, zilia, all these kind of dryland trees, fair amount of euphorbias. And it's a gully, and it's a rocky gully. And in a hunt, you have these younger boys who are making the noise, rolling rocks, creating that noise. And we've already tracked the boar. And in a hunt, there is this time when there is a lot of noise because you want to rouse the game. And then suddenly the boys stop, and you need to merge in that landscape. And it's a gully like this. And we're expecting the boar from that end. And there are these trees, and trees growing out of rock. And most of us manage to find a spot. And again, there's a moment when there's absolute silence. You hear just the smallest rustle, everything is heard. And it's absolutely quiet. And we're waiting. The closest person to me, because I'm narrating it from my perspective, was a guy on a rock, an old man, say about the other end of this hall. And the furthest away was perhaps 70 meters. And it's a sloping gully, and it's full of loose rock. And we wait, we're all hidden, and we're all behind these shrubs or trees. And these are longbows, 6 feet. And everybody is waiting. After a long time, expecting this boar to come in, because the game had been roused from that side, suddenly this huge, full-grown peacock comes into this trap of people waiting on both sides of the gully, and he walks right in. And you know how peacocks take these long, high steps, pecking, and watching. It's coming down. It goes that way, and then it sort of comes towards me. And I look at this old man on that rock who blinks, which I realize is leave it. It can't be because it's a national bird, you know. Better let this bird go. So much meat walking away. So I thought, no, these guys are not into national birds. And it walks off. Out of the trap, out of range of an arrow. With a longbow, you get 25-meter shot. If it's beyond 25 meters, you can hit it, you get a blood drop, you get a blood trail, but you won't drop it. 25 meters. And it went off. Gone. I just couldn't figure it out. And just when I thought, what's wrong? The boar. Smelling, swishing tail, and there it walks right into the trap. It doesn't bother with loose rock making a sound and comes right in. We took that home. So that's my starting story about a whole people, completely coherent, able to know what's going on, that they need to leave this peacock, that the boar was coming. So many things had happened in that moment. And I was such a fool in that situation, still thinking of national animal, national bird, meat, walking away. And these guys knew exactly what they wanted, and they got it. So we came home with a boar. This is Bastar, southernmost part of Madhya Pradesh, old Madhya Pradesh, and old Orissa, which is the Malkangiri district. These two districts merge. And the landscape of all of this territory, this central Indian part, is this undulating kind of plateau between 600 and 1200 meters. It rains in the higher, the most rain you get is about 1500 meters. As you go south in Bastar, it rains less, it's drier. And the line of Sal, Shorea robusta, ends in the middle of Bastar. So you know that that's the moist part, or the moist deciduous, and then the dry deciduous starts. That's the central Bastar. Then it's teak and mahua and all the other trees. Anogesis, all the pale-barked ones which take more light. And this side is the Sal forest patch. And I'm talking mainly of the Sal forest areas. That incident which happened was about a year or two after I had first sort of lost my way into Bastar, or found my way. And that hunt was a kind of time when I realized that I was absolutely intoxicated with that kind of people and that kind of possibility of living a life. And that perhaps most of us had missed the point, me too. So from that, where one gets very intoxicated with a lifestyle which one thinks is absolutely fine. I began to get into involving myself in the various fields of knowledge which they obviously had. And there was no division. There was no anthropology and botany and ethnobotany and, river ecology or nothing. It was all one field. And as Ravi said, and thank you for using that phrase also, this standing anthropology on its head, where this obsession, because at university also this obsession with objectivity, that was very difficult. When you're intoxicated with your subject, you can't be objective. So I ended up being extremely subjective, and then coming out on the other side objectively. And the journey itself takes about 10 to 20 years, because you're so subjective that after 10 years you begin to realize that you don't have to believe in every tribal person. They can also be wrong. They're completely wrong sometimes. They don't know what they're talking about. And you have the courage to be objective and disagree. So many times in a village meeting, I could also begin to disagree, because I am not saying whatever the tribal says is right, which is one of the problems we all have in fieldwork. We trust. It's the local language thing, and it's this local person said. The local people can be wrong. So that started to happen to me, that it's a longer journey, so the time spent is very important. After this hunt, and after several hunts like this, mainly when you're talking about hunting, I should make one or two remarks about hunting. People who can hunt, people who travel like that, live with very little, there is a confidence which they emanate. That is, you don't make a duplicate bow. You don't make a spare bow. You have a bow, and you have the confidence that if it breaks, you can make another one. You don't have to make 6 bows. You don't have to have 4 vehicles. That if this breaks down, I will use this 6 baskets. Make one, breaks down, use the next, or you make the next. And that when you're talking about bows, one more thing I'd like to mention. You know that picture we all see in our Ramayana thing with Ram, Lakshman, Sita, Hanuman. You remember the bow there? It's a recurve bow, that one. It goes like this, and it's a recurve. Recurve bows, if Ram had gone to Dandakaranya, that is my area of Bastar, he would have starved. You can't hunt animals, you can't stalk game with a recurve bow. You need a longbow. And the longbows have been well adapted for horseback too by Native Americans who fought from horseback after the horse came with the Spanish. Anyway, that's a digression. But the bow is very important. And we have this image of this recurve for some reason. And it's a wrong image. Very soon after this hunting thing, and after a year or two, one of the first, the kind of topic I gave for this talk or presentation was sleepwalking into conservation. And until this moment, I had not even thought about conservation. I was not a conservationist in that way. But the first time we ate mango, that is, there was a mango festival, and it's one of the biggest festivals in central India. And in anthropological terms, we call it first fruit ceremonies. And the mango festival is one of the biggest of the first fruit ceremonies and of all festivals in central India. It's a very big one. The only other big festival, there are many others. Another big festival is post-harvest, when we wake up the drums. It's woken up and then it keeps you awake all night. But the mango festival was the first time I realized after some time that what a first fruit ceremony actually meant, and that it was an ecological sense that was showing. I didn't figure it out because I had no clue about it. But it took me a year or two of mango festivals and other festivals, which were actually first fruit ceremonies. Mangoes were eaten when they were very ripe. They were eaten, thrown, and ripe mangoes regenerate. And there was no planting of things already found in the wild. This thing of planting, having a nursery, and taking that path of conservation came to me much later. But I realized that if you follow a date, you're already there. And then I began to notice from different villages, because I said it's a hilly terrain, people in the upland villages would have their same mango festival maybe a week later, 8 days later, 4 days later. It ripens slightly later. And the mango festival was decided by actually going into the forest and looking around. People look around and saying, this might be the right time to eat. Because once you start eating, that's it, till it finishes. But to set a good date, you have to deal with all the giant squirrels, the civets who nibble at it, and all sorts of other mammals which come for it, birds pick on it. So the date is balancing this, that we eat enough, it is ripe, it is regenerating, and we don't make any conscious effort to keep it going. So the mango was one, and one of the things which I seemed to get into then was that if this was ecology, this was ecological behavior, and that a whole society, whole communities are ecologically behaving, there was no conscious effort. There was no conscious effort to teach somebody saying, this mango, it has to ripen, you're telling your children or telling in the school. But a behavior which is ingrained, and it makes ecological sense. That good behavior, a good Gond or a good Durwa or a good Koitoor, behaves in such a way that it is ecological. It just seems to make sense. And it is subconscious, most of ecological knowledge which is passed across. At this point, I like to make another example. Over the last years, I have been working on wild forest foods, fish, small meat mainly, and plant foods. And one of the young boys who used to come along with me into the forest had been to school, but he knew his yams, and I was mainly looking for yams in that time. And if you know yams, this genus of Dioscorea, yams are usually dug up in the dry season, after the rain, usually at a time when the leaves have fallen. So you only have a kind of climbing stem, usually wilted leaves, and there are no flower. So it's very difficult to identify yams, especially if you look at botanical books. Seldom do you find the botanist telling you this is the picture of the tuber, this is how it tastes, this is how deep it is, and this is the vegetative or the flowering part. Rare. Because the botanist is looking up, only the above ground part, and most Adivasis are looking down. And they are usually identifying the yams by how deep it is, do the roots spread before they have the tubers, and whether it's gooey or flowery, is it crisp when you eat it? How long do you need to cook it? So the taxonomy of tubers can be done in the way it's cooked or in the way it's felt, tasted, acrid, too much toxins. So this boy used to come with me, and each time he would say, this one, it'll go like, we have nothing on top to go by. And he'd say, this one you might find a few prickles at the base, or this one runs long, the tube will be there, and so on. And each time he was right. Okay. So at one point I wondered how he knew so much about tubers. And he said that when he was very young, his mother would have taken him along. So before school, so before he was perhaps 5, 6, or earlier. So women do take their children. So she would put him on this rock, sit him up, and she would be digging. So all the time, this young boy was watching, just watching mother dig, how deep, where it goes. And of course, at home he would eat. And as he grows up, till about 6 or 5, he must have watched this. And that's how he could tell me now after school, when he's 18, he's telling me all this about yams. Coming back to the first fruit ceremonies, this is another incident of the subconscious, the observation and no actual conversation in transmitting something like this. And it's very difficult. And if there are botanists here, you will know how difficult it is to work on yams. And so this subconscious way of passing across ecological knowledge was something I wanted to remark. And a lot of the first fruit ceremonies, which are dealing with fruit, shoots, even leaves, because across central India there is a tradition of making leaf cups, larger ones or smaller ones. There are, say, about 6 or 7 different kinds of leaf cups that are made, depending on the occasion and depending what they need to contain, whether it's rice or something with gravy or whether it's porridge. And every day people use leaves. And in a in a village of about 80 homes, 80 chulas, 80 herds, I calculated that we were getting something like 14,000 leaves a day. That people are going around gathering it. A lot to do with drinking, rice beer or mahua, because you drink and throw all day. All the rice and the whatever you're eating. So 14,000 leaves could be quite a stress on the forest. But we have first fruit ceremonies which include leaves. So certain leaves are only used at certain times. And always festivals, or not festivals, social occasions like marriages, ceremonies for the dead, take into account the flushing of leaves, the maturing of leaves, so that you don't mess up with that. I mean, I don't say they have this subconscious thing is working, but the first fruit ceremonies are taken into account about when to hold a marriage, because you need thousands of leaves to deal with a huge host gathering. So the entire year, I found, was divided into these festivals, say 5 or 6, and some small ones which dot the rest of the time. And each of them dealt with which flowers to use, which leaves to stop using. And strangely, much of this is in communities which have still good forest. But as you come out towards the towns, you find there is less forest, and there would be perhaps one priest or one household which still maintains the tradition of a first fruit ceremony, almost like a relic. And it's strange that you find that still in some homes which are completely swamped in a town, but it's a tribal home, and they relate to that. I was wondering just to think about, say in Bastar, if the first fruit ceremony of mango was law. We are talking about gram sabhas and panchayat raj in Bastar a lot, or in all of central India, from Jharkhand and Orissa right across to Khammam in Telangana. But nobody seems to make a law which are actually ecological. It's mainly laws take you somewhere else. It's to do with resources, but this is also a resource. We're not talking of this. Please give me a minute. Moment. All this which I've been telling you, the happy side of things, I should put it in context. In the 80s, when I started, or late 70s, when I started to make these journeys, the capital for Bastar was Bhopal, 1,000 kilometers away. It was very nice. There was no official presence at all. There was the odd forest guard who would be fleecing some people, but that's nothing compared to what's happening now. Of course, there was all this injustice going on. On the Malkangiri side, again about 600 kilometers to Bhubaneswar, and through rough terrain. And the minimum we had to walk to get to a bus head was about 2.5 days, so 2 nights somewhere on the way. But today that's not there. They've cut it up, the cake has been divided, and now the fight is about who will get which share. So it is that distance which has now come down, that part of the 80s, which I'm talking about, early 80s, it went on like this with very little change. The odd roads started coming. When the road comes, it's the timber which goes. Those kind of stories everybody knows. And one didn't sort of feel so bad. I mean, at one point I reported a whole truck of timber which was going off at night from not far from where I lived. And I went off very happily to the conservator and told him this is the number of the truck and all that. And I've spied on it. And then later I realized that the conservator, the collector, and the SP were such thick friends. They were all having parties every night. So, I mean, that was beginning in the 90s. And I'm just giving you a timeline. 90s, these changes began to be felt. And there were more police, more questionings. It was after the 90s that anybody traveling like me could be picked up and questioned. And it would happen often, so often that you just wonder what's going on. You didn't bother, but it was not very nice to be all the time called to a police station. So that was the 90s. 2000, things start to change. And between 2000 and 2010, we had begun, we had sort of put together a small group, which we called it the Legal Environmental Action Forum. But we were a small group of Adivasi people. I'm the non-Adivasi in it. And we realized that we were working trying to talk about rights, trying to deal with timber loss. When there is another trader who's coming up with some scam, we would sort of try to report things. But we were getting into a lot of law. We were trying to find about rights. Encroachment was a big thing. And the forest department really clamped down around late 90s, mid 90s. So everybody would cut land before the 1980 Forest Rights Act. No, Forest Protection Act. So all those things were starting. But as it came closer to 2010, the amount of police in the area and the kind of stance which the earlier government and now more these governments took was very difficult to function. That you could not talk about human rights, you could not talk about human rights abuses, you couldn't talk about any complaint against the state. After 2010, it got worse, where the moment you complain, you're asked, who do you think you are? You all guess in Hindi, क्या नक्सल समझ रहे हो क्या? So immediately the association was, so you think you've got this Naxal support, and you know what it means in our country. So all of that started to fade. All protest, all of that. There was very little space for us to act. And since this Naxal problem started, or I don't want to call it Naxal, but security problem started, there's a very strange thing which has happened all across central India. All that colonialization, all those years of missionaries, British people, administration, our own forest department, the traders, all of them put together haven't done as much damage as what has happened in the last 25 to 30 years. And that's because we now live in a situation of fear, because you don't know who to speak to, you don't know what to say, you don't know who's a reporter, who's on which side. And that happens sometimes within a family. Two brothers who may not know how much to speak in a home. And that kind of fear is what has changed Bastar and central India today. Jharkhand is not any better, nor is Orissa, or Gadchiroli areas of Maharashtra. I guess you know these zones, and Khammam in Telangana, Warangal. Oh, again the list is going on. So the area became a huge conflict zone. And this part of my talk is going to be about how do you do conservation in a conflict zone? How do you work? How do you function? Where in the past, when I said I have a 3-day walk to go to another village, I didn't think twice. It was wonderful. You take our stuff, we're a small group of people, or we are going across to another village for a marriage, for a festival, to shop, to buy medicine, but we are going across camping in the night by a river. And that was another nice journey. Of course, strenuous, but there was no tension. Today, you can't do journeys like that in the night because you can be shot at. Nobody knows which side is moving, who's camping. So all those kind of movements have been restricted. So when you talk about conservation in a conflict zone, many things which we were doing suddenly becomes very difficult. Like in the conservation which we had, like I told you about the first fruit ceremonies, the other ways of, I think, very valid kinds of conservation, which I think we should all think about a little more. One is, I think it started maybe in Orissa it's very famous, but it's followed in many places, including Andhra Pradesh, which is called Thengapalli. You most likely know the word. Thenga is any danda, stick. And in Bastar, they usually decorate it beautifully, like a ceremonial staff. And whoever has the staff and roams around the village forest is the guardian of the forest that day. And in the evening, the staff is left in any house he thinks should follow it, take it up the next day. And the village usually pays the person with grain or whatever, if it's the same person every day. But if it's done by everybody, nobody needs to pay anybody. But this Thengapalli system is very common all over Bastar and Orissa. And that stick has a kind of power, gives you an authority to stop destructive thing, to stop timber poaching, to do all sorts of authoritative, it gives you an authoritative position. So that is one major way in which still today many community forests in central India are taken care of. The other very important one is the tradition of sacred groves. And the largest one I've seen in Bastar is about 100 acres. It's large, it's huge, which is also a place for a lot of animals and birds to take shelter. And over the years, I've noticed, at least in this village with the 100 acres, they're so proud of it that every year they try to tell the guy cultivating on some fringe to leave it, move it. So we extend the grove. So the grove has been growing in the last 5 years. I've noticed it or in the last 15 odd years I've noticed it, it's grown at least 20, 30 acres, and it's from within. The forest department has immediately come now to put up a board and all that, but we've thrown them out. So it's completely from the people. This is another way. And over the last 20 odd years, we started to map sacred groves. And we found 80 or 100 within the district of Bastar. Many of them are in red territory, so we don't visit them very often. But many of them are not. And the idea of restoration of groves, we take from this large grove. Because the kind of vegetation it would have had, other groves, we can collect seeds, we do restoration work from this grove which is there to get the idea of what we need to restore it with on the other side, where the groves are degraded for whatever reason. The other when I talked about the first fruit ceremonies, I forgot to mention that there are two very strong pressures on the dates you set. One is from within, and one is one is external. The external one is, of course, Dabur and all his friends and all the traders who want pickle, because you need raw mango for pickle. That kind of stuff, bamboo shoots. The trading community which wants to push the date ahead, earlier. So ideally you could be harvesting your mangoes or have the mango festival after mid-May. People try to push it to early April. The difference is huge. And that's what the pickle industry wants. And so that pressure is very high in many parts of tribal India. And the internal pressure is very interesting, because only after you, or I can say, once you finish your festival, once you finish eating the mango or doing any other festival, you are free in a way. You are free to travel anywhere, and you may eat in a house which has not celebrated the festival. But it's not the other way around. That is, if you have eaten the mango, if you are already celebrated, you are impure, you are jhuta. That's over for you. So when you go to a person who's not eaten the mango, you can happily stay there, eat there. But if the person has not eaten the mango, and the other person has, then you may not eat there. You need to wait. So this thing of commensality starts to come in. So the later you push your own village festival, the more restricted you are during travel. And mango, if you know, is summertime, and summertime is festival time, marriage time, and travel time, visiting relatives time, clansmen, kinsmen. So there is this internal pressure to finish it off. So there are these people who will say, mango is not ripe, but will say, but my daughter's getting married. So that clashes. So that's the internal thing, which is usually resolved in some way inside. But the outer pressure, the trader, that is very, very strong. So these are things which the tribal people themselves have to deal with. And that is a part of the inner conflict. So when you come to, so all this, now I'm coming to 2010, and now where things went very bad, the situation is bad. We are still happy and drinking our mahua and rice beer, it's nice. But the times are bad, and you don't see an end to it. And there are times when the youth say, usually the old people tell us, in our time, things were great, and now it's bad. But our youth say that in our times were terrible. We hope when we are old we can say times are good. It changes things like that. So the youth talk like that. And because our village where I live for so long, it's the place where things went terrible in, what was the year? when the entire Congress convoy got wiped out, 2014. That was just outside. So 21 people got shot, and after that, the kind of combing operations we faced, the paramilitary is the army. So the way they've come into our villages, the way they've trampled on us and gone around, has made things very difficult. So over the last 7 years, we've been completely quiet about human rights. No human rights, only conservation. And we've been dealing with conservation in such a way that of course, we had the sacred grove to protect. We do a lot of fire protection. But conservation also to give this, our little group called LEAF, and also the people, because LEAF is not just 7 people or 10 people, it's just 10 or 20 villages. So that whole group, we've been all working on forest conservation, planting, restoration, looking at degraded forests. And we have large nurseries of native plants. But the difficulties in conflict zones is where we used to very easily go and collect seeds in our forest. Today it's being combed by guys with guns. So we need to even do seed collection in a strategic way, because we've also timed those guys when they go this way. So if you see the shoe marks, we can track bow, we can track shoes. So oh, they went this way today. That means they take a route like that and they will come back like that. So we go behind them to do our seed collection. When we go to get yams, we have to take a route which everybody in villages now knows these shoes, these tracks. So that's the way that is done, seed collection. And I think I will stop because there is no time, as usual. So, yeah. So, what I would like to ask for help here, I've sort of described the situation perhaps in too dramatic a fashion, but conservationists, if people can also come that end and to see what is happening, because so much of your work is in Western Ghats. It's so much of it. It's just that. And at Western Ghats, I always have this problem whenever I meet these Western Ghats people. Good rainfall, lot of spices, Bollywood is also there, literary Pune, Goa, what do you want? And Kerala, God's own country. That whole belt, why are you all going there? Why don't you come Eastern Ghats, where the only anti-mining judgment has come from, the Samatha judgment. And that's where the fight is. It's dry, it's entirely tribal, and there is almost no state in many districts. But if you come that end, we get a lot of support. We get, and we can give you so many connections, and we can give you so many ideas to work on in terms of conservation, in terms of writing, photography, the kind of workshop I attended, which was very nice. But Eastern Ghats needs to have more young people. And I think we've missed out on that part of India, like many other places perhaps in India. But it could be a start because it's not far also, Vishakhapatnam, and then we can explore. So that is my request. And the other request for conservation scientists is that, because we've talked a lot about climate change off and on in the last 2 days, is that in villages there is a lot of knowledge about microclimatic observations, which is very difficult to document when you're working on very large things, especially with this kind of conflict. But just the order of mushrooms which tell you the stage of monsoon, everybody knows it. Or one last example and then I stop. Couple of years ago there was rain, drought in Tamil Nadu, but in central India and Bastar, the numbers showed that the rainfall was normal. But when I went in the village, they said, how was the rain this year? And they said, enough water, but not enough flow to take the leaf litter to the streams. And that was said in a phrase in Durwa which is Ketrele Neertal Uyaya. And 2-3 people use the same phrase when I asked them. So I thought this must be a pointer. It's saying something more than just that physical aspect of taking leaf litter to the stream. Then I said, so what? And I realized again, like that first story when I was the fool, I'm again the fool still, that they said if the leaf litter is not taken to the stream and the little rocks which are there are not plastered with these leaf litter, the dry leaf, where will the crabs have their nurseries? That's the kind of ecology I really like to promote, that I wouldn't have bothered with that kind of leaf litter thing. It's just this phrase in Durwa, But they also talk about mushrooms, the stage where the rainfall is more, or you say, this mushroom did not come this year. So these are the kind of ecology, especially with microclimatic changes, I would sort of suggest, I'm not qualified, but for you. Thank you very much.